Jordan Peterson has been unleashed by the Daily Wire. Now that they've signed him and he is probably financially secure, he's just going ham. Recently, Jordan Peterson was suspended for Twitter over comments he made about actor Elliot Page and top surgery. After the suspension, he said, I'm not going to take the tweet down. And now he's issued a decently long response, along with the Daily Wire, about 14 minutes where he says, I'd rather die than delete truthful tweet for cancel creeps. And there's more. In an interview that he did, along with the Daily Wire, he goes on to explain some of his other ideas. In a simple tweet, not that long ago, about a month ago, or actually only a couple of weeks ago, Jordan Peterson referenced a Sports Illustrated cover with an obese woman. And we all kind of ribbed at him because most of us didn't really care. Jordan Peterson took the tweet down. He said this morbidly obese woman was not attractive. Now, on Twitter, you can't really get the full idea out there. And this, well, it did a disservice to Jordan Peterson because I said, I responded to Jordan Peterson as I said, look, some people like fat chicks, right? Let them have their day. But Jordan Peterson went on to explain Sports Illustrated showing this woman. This is not a positive thing to be showing young people. And he's going on to basically comment on cultural decay and how all of these things are effectively, or as my interpretation of it, leading to the collapse. I think we're in the collapse. And I often on this channel talk about politics and how political issues are taking shape in this country. And I often leave the cultural issues to my other channel, but seeing Jordan Peterson's return and his powerful statement related to Elliot, aka formerly known as Ellen Page, I thought we should actually dive into these issues and take a look at what's going on with transgender sports and trans kids, because this is what Jordan Peterson is getting into. And we also have a video coming out from The Daily Show with Trevor Noah addressing trans women in sports. In a statement from a transgender athlete, Veronica Ivy, they basically go on to say that transgender women, those that are born male, are actually female. And I think it's important to discuss this and what Dr. Peterson is saying, because we can see how the shift takes place. It was not that long ago they said gender and sex are not the same thing. That a trans woman, someone who identifies as a woman, is actually a male. Like a trans woman is someone who is born male, wants to be a woman, goes through the transition, but is still biologically male. That's no longer the case. On national television, this is what is being told to young people. And it's becoming an issue because we need to understand medical terms. We need to understand medical science. It's often the left that says, trust in science. Well, the science shows us that there's a very serious risk to female humans, also known as women, when it comes to medication and testing. And that's why it's important that we know if someone is biologically male or biologically female. It wasn't until the 90s that we actually had a law passed saying clinical trials must be performed on males and females because drugs have different effects on different biological sexes. But because of the modern transgender ideology, it's resulting in hot politics and inability to communicate. And the language battle is quite culturally destructive. But let's do this. We'll get started by taking a look at what Jordan Peterson had to say when he said he'd rather die, the political ramifications. And also, I think what really made me want to talk about this is Jordan Peterson's view on the morbidly obese women, because he kind of makes an interesting point. If a young boy is told to look at a morbidly obese woman and he is told this woman is attractive, but the young boy doesn't agree, they say, well, maybe it's because you're LGBTQIA+, when in reality, maybe the kid just doesn't like obese women. And this is where the confusion comes in and the debate starts to arise. But as you know, having a conversation around these issues is impossible. Even Trevor Noah says it. If you ask simple questions, you're labeled transphobic. So let's take a look at what Dr. Jordan Peterson has to say in his powerful return and entrance with the Daily Wire. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com to become a member and help support our work. Guys, we can't just let the Daily Wire claim the top of the hill. As much as major shout out to the crew of the Daily Wire and their massive expansion, I'm a big fan. Go to timcast.com, click the sign up button on the top right, join timcast.com to allow us to grow to rival the Daily Wire. I'm glad they're displacing corporate press. I, too, would like to displace the corporate press. We got a lot of awesome shows in the works. Cast Castle Vlog is starting to take off. We're doing more bits. We're trying to make it more like a vlog-style sitcom. We've also got the new season of Tales from the Inverted World dropping tonight and the new book. With your support, in a year or two, or who knows, we'll be putting out movies, documentaries. We've got 2 documentaries in the preliminary stages, and it's thanks to you at timcast.com. So don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's talk about Jordan Peterson's stance on his suspension and what's going on with the trans issue. Jordan Peterson was recently suspended because he made a reference to Elliot Page, formerly known as Ellen Page, after coming out as trans and changing her name to Elliot Page and identifying with he/him pronouns. Dr. Jordan Peterson said that Ellen Page had her breasts removed by a criminal physician. I believe he said physician, but let's read from the Daily Wire. Jordan Peterson says, and I'm not going to read the entirety of his statement. It's actually quite verbose, but I'll bring up some key points. And then I want to talk about how our children are being affected in the culture war. He says, a few days ago, I penned an irritated tweet in response to one of the latest happenings on the increasingly heated culture war front in response to the decision of an actor named Ellen Elliot Page. I am employing this awkward and impossible multiple naming style because it is now apparently mandatory and probably doing it wrong. Nonetheless, as you're doing it wrong is the whole point of what has been made mandatory, but also to make a point. I've essentially been banned from Twitter. I say banned, although technically I have been suspended, but the suspension will not be lifted unless I delete the hateful tweet in question. And I would rather die than do that, and hopefully it will not come to that, although who the hell knows in the increasingly strange days. What was it that I said that caused such a fuss? And even more importantly and complexly, what exactly was it that I said that resulted in the ban? Here's the tweet in question. Dr. Jordan Peterson said, remember when pride was a sin? And Ellen Page just had her breasts removed by a criminal physician. Now, my personal view of this, we've talked about it last night. I talked about it a little bit at 1. It was referring to it as criminal because it's illegal. And I think Jordan Peterson actually points that out. He says, according to the rules, you may not promote violence, threaten, harass other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, orientation, identity, or gender, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease. By clicking delete, you acknowledge that your tweet violated the rules. He goes on to say that if you appeal to it, they'll keep your account locked. Now, he goes on to break down in great detail what this really means and trying to dissect why he was banned. I'll give you the simple version. Remember when pride was a sin, referring to Pride Month in a derogatory manner, calling Ellen Page, because dead naming, I believe, is a violation of the rules, Ellen instead of Elliot, saying criminal physician. I think there's many issues here, but the bigger picture, in my opinion, is that he's not harassing, he's not threatening, he's not insulting, he's not targeting Ellen over LGBTQ issues, but perhaps because calling pride a sin. These are the issues at play here. Now, look, I don't know or care, to be honest, about Elliot Page's life. That's for Elliot Page to decide. I don't know or care about what Elliot or any of the producers on Umbrella Academy should do. I understand the issues around children. And that's where what Jordan Peterson's talking about starts to get more interesting. He's saying he refuses to take that tweet down. He'd rather die. I've made the argument that he could take the tweet down and then put up a big message saying, follow me to a different platform. Leave this platform and let's go somewhere else. But okay, he'd rather die. Hope not, Dr. Peterson. You're a good voice. The Daily Mail has this story referring to an interview Jordan Peterson did. Not the ideal of athletic beauty. Dr. Jordan Peterson doubles down on criticism of plus-size Sports Illustrated model and says confused gay kids are being convinced they're transsexual. I saw that headline, and I'm not entirely sure that Jordan Peterson was trying to combine these ideas, but I sort of noticed something in that case. There is an article from Salon saying we need to redefine what born this way means. For the longest time, as I was growing up, I was told that gay people were born that way. That they didn't choose to like people of the same sex. I have friends who are LGBTQ who say they wish they were straight, that no one wishes to live a marginalized life. I certainly think there are some people who do, because it's not so marginalized anymore when they're flying the pride flag. You know, cities are actually doing it. But then I noticed something interesting. In a recent tweet, this was May 16th. Okay, so this is actually 2 months ago. Jordan Peterson said, "Sorry, not beautiful, and no amount of authoritarian tolerance is going to change that." He was making a reference. He was talking about this morbidly obese woman on the cover of Sports Illustrated, Yumi Nu. Now, I responded saying, "Look, some people like fat chicks." But then I see an interesting point here. An interesting point. If it is true that we do not choose our sexuality, as many on the LGBTQ have said, then you need to consider that there are going to be children who are going to see this. They're going to be told it's beautiful. They're not going to agree. And then you're going to have teachers and groomers and whatever else saying, if you don't think that's beautiful, you must be homosexual. Maybe you like men. The issue is particularly confusing for young people when maybe they just like slimmer women because they don't choose their sexuality, right? It's also entirely possible the kids may turn out to be gay, but the issue is the gay population is in the single digits. It is substantially more likely that the kid just doesn't find these kinds of women attractive. And this is where things start to get confusing for children. And it starts to lead to, in my opinion, cultural decay. Before I read what they say about Jordan Peterson, I want to jump back to the story from Bill Maher to exemplify my point. Salon writes, Bill Maher messed up bad with the LGBTQ community. On the latest episode of Real Time, Maher made a comment about trans kids that landed him in the hot seat. May 22nd, around the same time that Jordan Peterson was making his point about these women. Bill Maher was buried under an avalanche of criticism on Saturday after using his Friday night closing comments to ridicule trans kids and their need for gender-affirming care, saying they are only doing it because it's more trendy than being gay. After suggesting the LGBT population of America seems to be roughly doubling every generation, Maher added, according to a recent Gallup poll, less than 1% of Americans born before 1946, Joe Biden's generation, identify that way. 2.6 of boomers do, 4.2 of Gen X, 10.5% of millennials, and 20.8% of Gen Z, which means if we follow this trajectory, we will all be gay in 2025. He then glibly joked, if this spike in trans children is all biological, why is it regional? Either Ohio is shaming them or California is creating them, before making a few more crude comments. First, the leftist view of this. The leftists pointed out that it was not socially acceptable to write with your left hand. And there were religious institutions that would whack your hand with a ruler if you used your left because left was wrong. You must use your right. Once people were free to be left-handed, the amount of left-handed people skyrocketed and then plateaued. The belief in that argument is that 20% of Gen Z will be LGBTQ, but it will probably stay around that point. And the issue is that forever, 20% of the population was LGBT, but they were not allowed to express it socially. I'll make this point with the internet. Why is it that there are so many people of strange fetishes or identities? Why are there so many people who want to dress up like cartoon animals? I was talking with Seamus Coughlin of Freedom Tunes about this over at Timcast IRL, and he made the point, the internet. It's allowed people to find each other. I agree. Before the internet, if you identified as a furry, you had a harder time finding other people who you could interact with as a furry. For gay people, you needed to go to a gay bar, and that was a safe space where you knew everyone else, most people there, would probably share your desires. With the internet, now you're safe because there's no threat of physical harm to you, and it's easier now for people to find other people who share their identities or desires, and thus we see an expansion of this. However, I don't completely agree with the leftist argument. I do think it's obvious. If people are allowed to express themselves, you will get more people doing so, and thus the numbers will go up. But I also think that Bill Maher makes a very important point. Why is it regional? Ohio? Look, California may be more accepting and have laws, but it's not even about Ohio. It's about there are many states in all over the country who have similar protection laws, but we don't see comparable rates of self-identity. We don't see this in pronounced. I mean, I'll put it this way. We should be seeing many people in red states coming out now that it's become more socially acceptable. We see it a little bit, but not at the same numbers. Thus, I think there's a mix here. And that's the point when I jump back to Jordan Peterson's point. He says, speaking to the Telegraph, the use of that model, this is the morbidly obese woman, who was not athletic, remember Sports Illustrated, was manipulative economically and in relation to the model herself, although she participated in her own exploitation. He told the Telegraph, beauty is an ideal. Almost all of us fall short of an ideal. I'm not willing to sacrifice any ideal to faux compassion, period, and certainly not the ideal of athletic beauty. He added that he deleted his Twitter account from his personal devices to prevent him from reading comments from anonymous trolls that insisted he was a white supremacist and transphobe. You don't need to delete your Twitter to do that. You can just ignore it. But I started thinking when he pointed this out, perhaps one of the reasons we are seeing a rise in kids identifying as LGBTQ is because they're consistently told that morbidly obese women are attractive, and maybe they're just not attracted to her. But what do we hear? We're hearing from the left that if you're not attracted to a trans woman, you're transphobic, or you might be gay. It's one of the things they've actually said. So imagine this. Imagine you're a 13-year-old boy. You have an idea, a desire, you have an orientation. You were born that way. They come to you and say, here's a big fat woman. Are you attracted to her? This is real beauty. And they say no. And they go, really? Here's a trans woman. A trans woman is a woman. Are you attracted to her? And they say, no. And they say, it sounds like you aren't attracted to women. And then they say, maybe you're gay. Many of these kids are probably confused by this. Maybe the reality is they're just attracted to traditionally attractive women. Maybe they're attracted to someone more their age or something to go to school with. But if you're consistently told that a trans woman is a woman and is female, but then you say you're not attracted to that, they ask you, maybe it's because you don't like women, which would make you gay. I have to say, this is probably very, 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 very confusing for young kids. Which brings me now to the evolution of the debate. This video here from The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Veronica Ivy, a transgender athlete who competes in cycling, speaking with Trevor Noah, saying at one point, it's all about, I'll put it this way, quote, it all boils down to, do you actually think that trans women and intersex women are real women and are really female or not? And if you do, it's very simple. Just stop policing who counts as a real woman. The idea then would be, we don't need testosterone checks. We don't need body checks or anything like that. If someone says they're a female, they're allowed. But hold on there a minute. I thought the argument was that trans women weren't female, they were women. That women is anyone who identifies as a woman, which is a circular definition. But now they're saying female is social. Female and male are scientific terms. Male is the sex of the species that produces the mobile sperm. What is it? Spermatozoa or something? I don't know. And female produces the non-mobile ova. Those are distinct categories. Now, of course, intersex exists, and there is a question of how we can better protect intersex people and make sure it's fair to compete. But are they really female? Trans women are not female. And I don't mean that as in any way disrespectful. It's just reality. That's why you're a trans woman. That's why we have the word trans, because you were born male, but identify as an adult human female. You're not really female. You identify that way. You're a trans woman. But now the narrative is shifting. This video with 22,000 views as of today, it's got tons of we can't see the dislike ratio anymore. But this is where things start to break down and become confusing for young people, which I believe will ultimately result in more confusion and more harm to kids. There are a lot of videos that I think are scary. Detransitioners. We've interviewed them. People who are coming out and saying they regret their decisions. And it's tough. How do you protect these kids? Market Watch reports, I'll do anything to keep my family together. Trans kids' parents are draining their savings to flee conservative states. States like Alabama and Texas have moved to block transgender kids' access to gender-affirming treatments and forcing families to weigh expensive relocations. I am of the opinion minors should not be allowed to undergo transgender therapies or surgeries. That's my personal opinion. What I mean by therapies, I mean medical. If a kid is, if a person is underage, they're a minor, and they're going in for like therapy in general, like talking to them to try and help them, good thing. We don't want people taking their lives, and that is a risk. I'm worried about that. People who are having identity crises, regardless of whether it's gender, racial, or otherwise, we want to make sure we can help them. I don't think minors should be given medication or surgeries, but that is what's happening. Now, that's just where I stand. The left believes they should do this, and many minor females have been getting their breasts removed. That's permanent. That's absolutely permanent. Puberty blockers are permanent. These things are permanent, and they're damaging, which is why I think once you're an adult, you're at that point where you can start making decisions for yourself. There's a question then, at what point can the parents make decisions for their children? I don't have all the answers. I would like to reference John Money, who you may have heard of. John Money, he really expanded the use of the word gender. The word gender had been around for a long time, but he really took that word and expanded its use to refer to the social constructs around biological sex. For a long time, gender just referred to your biological sex because they were seen as mostly the same thing. John Money is famous for taking two twin boys. One had a botched circumcision. So the parents, with money, decided to do a forced sex change operation on the baby. John Money then, in my opinion, effectively tortured these kids, made them simulate adult activities on each other as they were children, made the biological male who underwent a forced operation to undergo hormone therapies, trying to raise this male as a female without the male knowing. Ultimately, it's a terrible story, both committed suicide. But while many people point to this being an example of why you shouldn't put children have them undergo transgender surgeries or whatever, it's also an argument used by the left to explain that gender identity is real and cannot be forced on a child. It is not so simple. In my opinion, my view of it is, at that point then, if we recognize that gender identity is, within a person, there should be no irreversible procedures until the person is old enough to make an accurate decision. And honestly, there are real moral questions here, but it may not be till 24. Let me break this down. This young child, this baby was born male, forcefully made to represent as female, but still male. When this young man found out what they had done to him, immediately detransitioned, because within them they knew they were male. They retained that identity regardless of what was imposed upon them. The left argues the same can be true for any child. Someone can be born, they can develop trans, and then say, in much the exact same way as this other child, they are in the wrong body and they are trans. And then there's a fear. If this young man who was forcefully transitioned committed suicide, there is a fear that a young trans child would do the same thing, and thus the logic follows. The parents feel they are better off sterilizing the child than having the child die. And that's a real question. I mean, honestly, I don't want anybody to die. And so what do? Everybody thinks they have the answers. I'll put it this way. An irreversible procedure can result in the same circumstances in which this young man who was victimized by John Money took their own life. In which case, the best thing we can do for kids we believe to be trans is to let them grow up. At 18, they can make their choices. If someone is 12, 13, 14, or even 15 or 16, and they feel trans, and they undergo irreversible medical procedures, you are increasing their risk of taking their own life. They may have a higher risk there, but what do? We let them make the decision at 18 with proper counseling, with legitimate explanations for how these medications will affect their body. Which brings me to this story here from the Daily Mail, June 30th. Doctor who ran clinic for transgender children and failed an 11-year-old transitioning from female to male by not fully explaining drugs could make them infertile is suspended for just 2 months. Helen Weberly was suspended for 2 months for gender treatment failures. She was said to not have provided follow-up care to 2 children on testosterone. Her husband, Michael, was struck off for putting patients at risk for serious harm. Michael diagnosed patient W as gender dysphoric without consulting their GP. Patient W later killed themselves while transitioning from female to male. And this is my point. The best thing we can do is psychological therapy, but no permanent medical alterations. We don't have all the answers. I believe trans kids exist. I don't know what the left's point is. I take a look at Jordan Peterson's anger and ire. I take a look at his powerful statements and his refusal to bow to the censors. And I respect it. I understand why he's angry in his statements about Ellen Elliott Page and these physicians. A patient, an 11-year-old, was not given the proper explanation of what these drugs were going to do, took their own life. Is it the doctor's fault? Many would say yes. The doctor should not have given permanent life-altering drugs to an 11-year-old. The risk of suicide is real. I have friends who have taken their own lives for a variety of reasons. I had a trans friend who took their own life. And it is heartbreaking. We want to do whatever we can to make sure people don't take their own lives. I mean, first and foremost, you just don't want it to happen. And I'm sickened by the people who even meme about telling people to do it online. And for those that are more religious, it's a mortal sin. You don't want anyone taking their own lives. I don't think any sane and rational and good person really does. There are bad people who do. But this doctor contributed to it, thinking they were doing good. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't have the answers, but you can't just assume that, someone who's 18, who was experiencing dysphoria or who was regretting their transition, we can't assume we could have done anything. Sometimes non-intervention is the answer. And what I mean by that is keep an eye on these individuals you think are at risk. Talk to them, be there for them, be their friends, inspire them, make them feel good about themselves and all that stuff. But be wary of what you're doing to children because children don't know everything. They say a doctor who ran an online clinic for trans patients has been suspended from practicing for 2 months. Helen Weberly, founder of Gender GP website, was found to have committed serious misconduct by the Medical Practitioners Tribunal Service. The tribunal, which started to hear evidence in July, found she had not provided proper follow-up care to 2 patients aged 12 and 17 who were prescribed testosterone, and failed an 11-year-old patient by omitting to discuss risks to fertility before prescribing GnHRA puberty blockers. This is terrifying. All it was a suspension. This woman simply was suspended after destroying the life of a child. You see, she was trying to do good by that child. So saith Twitter, they're trying to do good as well. Those of us who are actually trying to do right, do good, and do well, want to make sure that all of these kids are properly informed. But because of the censorship policies, the banning of people like Jordan Peterson, you're not giving them proper information. They say in the tribunal's view, an informed member of the public would be surprised if a finding of impairment on public interest grounds were not made in those circumstances. It therefore finds Dr. Weberly's fitness to practice is impaired on a wider public interest grounds. Jaden Lowe, a trans teen, took his own life in 2018 by stepping in front of a train after being prescribed hormone treatment. The treatment didn't do anything to save this individual. The patient had become unhappy at the long waiting lists for NHS treatment and sent in an email that they wanted to transition as soon as possible as it would have a massive positive impact on their mental health. I have been waiting to go on hormones so long now, and it means so much to me. I am so happy it's finally happening. But Dr. Weberly diagnosed patient W with gender dysphoric without checking information with their GP. Patient W had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and had complex and long-standing mental health issues, but did not appear that Dr. Weberly was aware of them. And he'd failed to obtain the patient's medical records. Sadly, patient W took their own life just 3 months later. Patient W is believed to be Jaden Lowe, who was prescribed the treatment by the Gender GP clinic and subsequently stepped in front of a train. There's 2 ways to look at this because it's hard to break down what this story really means. Either this individual, I believe it was the 11-year-old who didn't understand the infertility, but this individual received the hormones, it appears. They were prescribed testosterone, It didn't help them. If we want to have an actual conversation about helping these people, we cannot allow bullies to silence these questions and silence these statements. We cannot allow them to suspend the likes of Dr. Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist who's probably more qualified to speak on this than many medical doctors. Yet that's what's happening. The Daily Wire is doing great work. And so, it's Friday. I got to be honest. I'm looking at this political news and it matters. Democrats don't want Democrats don't want Joe Biden. I said Jordan. But I just thought this was more important, talking about these social issues and just doing a deep dive on the stuff that's happening. What can we do to make sure we legitimately want to help kids who are undergoing an identity crisis? The way I've read it is you need to bring them to a nurturing community. Now, Bill Maher entertains the possibility of a social contagion element. Solon says this is wrong and it's nonsense. I think it's half true. I think for many kids, they are probably just saying these things because they want to fit in. Some kids have Asperger's and they don't know what to do to fit in properly, and they're told this will make you happy. Some kids look at morbidly obese women and say, I'm not attracted to that, and then they're told maybe they're gay, maybe they're actually trans. Young women similarly. Many lesbians in the lesbian community fear that young lesbian girls are being told they're actually trans because they're attracted to girls. We want to get this right. The problem is we have bullies and we have censorship making it all worse. If we're going to get to the bottom of this and make sure we help everybody and truly progress as a society, we can't ban Jordan Peterson. We need to ask him questions. We need to have real conversations about what he is saying and what it means. Well, the Daily Wire is giving space to that. So props to them. I am jealous. Maybe one day timcast.com will have the means to sign on people like Dr. Peterson, perhaps. I think we're going in that direction. And maybe then, with the expansion of the Daily Wire, their success, the success of timcast.com, we won't have to worry about the censorship, which is ultimately the point, and why I thought this was interesting and important. Jordan Peterson's ability to speak has not been hindered. I mean, on Twitter it has, but his voice has never been louder thanks to what the Daily Wire is building. That's what we need. So support us over at timcast.com, support the Daily Wire, and then we can have these real conversations. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/timcastirl. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.